Okay, everyone. So welcome to part 3 of our gut healing class. I appreciate seeing so many of you for the third time is awesome. It's fun to learn together and deep dive into how do we heal our gut and why do we heal our gut and what's the point of all of this. Um, Part 3 is really special to me because I started learning years ago about some of the mental health issues that run in my family and how I could eat food that would actually heal my gut, that would prevent me and my children from having the sometimes seemingly genetic disorders of addiction or bipolar or um, borderline personality. So if any of you have these in your family, you know how important it is to learn as much as you can, educate yourself, and then prevent them in yourself and the people around you. And a lot of what we're talking about, I learned through the University of Western States, which is where I got the master's degree in nutrition and functional medicine. So I am going to point out a couple things that professors there taught me specifically, because that is a unique training program. And it's just really special. So I'll send you sources and slides. And if anybody wants to dive in deeper, let us know. But we're going to go for about 35 minutes and then have plenty of time for questions. So again, use the chat for questions or write them down, and then we'll have time to get to them at the end. Okay. So this is just everything all at once. So I wanted to show you what happens when the gut is not working correctly. And so leaky gut, we've talked about in part 1 and part 2, and that's when there's openings between the cells of the gut. So if you look down here, if you just focus on number 3 down here where there's red, this is where there's space between the cells of the intestine. And when the space or the leaky gut occurs, zonulin is released. It's one of the chemicals that is released. So if you look up here towards the top of the slide, gliadin, which is a breakdown from wheat or gluten, also causes zonulin to be released. Stress also causes zonulin to be released. Alcohol also causes zonulin to be released. Believe it or not, exercise for a short period of time causes zonulin to be released. So zonulin's not all bad. It's a little bit like cortisol, but we want to lower the level of zonulin in order to heal the gut. And we now understand that this also heals the brain. So number 4 is what we're going to talk about today. When we have a leaky gut or a dysfunctional gut, lining of the intestine, which again is 30 feet long, when we have all of that tubing or surface area has leaky gut or spaces between the tight junctions, we release zonulin. The zonulin enters the bloodstream and goes to the brain. And what happens then is that the blood-brain barrier breaks down. There's a lot of conversation in the last 10, 15 years when I go to conferences. Everybody's talking about the blood-brain barrier. Is it real? Or did we discover this years ago and maybe our definition of what it is changing? And so some of the smartest people I know, the neurologists that are paying attention, the functional neurologists at these conferences, are talking about how probably the blood-brain barrier is not what we thought it was. And that means that almost everything that is in our bloodstream is getting into the brain. I don't think there's any surprise for those of us who've been paying attention to how your brain feels. You know, for example, when you drink alcohol, when it's in your bloodstream, you can tell when it's in your brain because you start to feel a little bit different. You know, if you're having constipation and there's a backup of toxins in the gut, which we're going to talk about more later, the toxins cause your brain to feel different. It can cause your balance to be off. So a lot of people tell me the worst part of constipation is they get a little bit of a headache or they just have brain fog. We're learning more about this because of COVID, because our long COVID patients often suffer from leaky brain, which is like a breakdown in the blood-brain barrier. And so everything from the bloodstream that shouldn't be getting into the brain is now getting into the brain. But I just wanted to let you know that it's an ongoing debate. A lot of the smartest providers I know are saying probably the blood-brain barrier is not that important of a thing to think about, because everything in your system, in your body, is entering your brain. So don't think of there as being a fat or a membrane between the two. Just consider that everything that's in your blood is really important for your brain to be healthy. And I think some of that is evident in the recent research where we've learned more about alcohol and how especially women should drink even less than we previously thought was healthy. Sorry. Okay, so there is a constant feedback loop between the gut and the brain. We know that if we get nervous and there's a test coming, or if you remember when you were in school and there's an exam coming, then your stomach starts to kind of rumble and churn, and you can feel a little bit more anxious because your stomach is churning, but you thinking about the upcoming test, even if you're not actively thinking about it, but it's kind of back in your subconscious, can cause the gut to be churning. So what's happening there is the gut is not in rest and digest, right? The gut is actually at that moment in time in panic mode. Sometimes the peristalsis, or the movement of the gut, increases when you're stressed. And that is actually because the gut, the lining of the intestine, one of the jobs, especially of the duodenum, is to absorb water from your stool. And when you're stressed, you need a lot more hydration. So everybody pause for a minute. If you have some water, let's take a sip of water. Because I don't know what's going on this week with the planets or whatever, but it seems like there's a lot of stress this week. So hopefully we'll get through and we'll get to St. Patrick's Day and everybody will feel better. But so that's number one, is that when you feel stressed, you notice that your gut feels different. I would also encourage you today or tomorrow, when you have time, to notice the opposite. Can you actually put your hands on your belly before and after you eat a meal, or maybe just after if you don't have time? And just gently put your hands on your belly, anywhere in your abdomen that feels comfortable to you. Or if it doesn't feel comfortable to touch your belly, could you just hold your hands right above and feel your stomach actually digesting? So what typically happens, and we talked about this, I think, in part one, is when you take a deep breath, especially in through your nose and out through your nose, now your stomach can start to digest, your intestines can start to move gently, very slowly, in a proper speed to digest your food, because we don't want to cause diarrhea, but we also don't want to cause constipation. And all of that is controlled by the brain. So it's really interesting because you can have periods of very slow kind of calm, and you can feel your stomach. And then you can also have periods of stress and you can notice your stomach. And the thing I encourage you to do is just get curious, right? I'm not saying notice your stomach, and then if you're stressed and your stomach's a little bit in knots, then you beat yourself up about it or you judge yourself. I'm saying just notice, see if you can just notice without judging yourself and see how it goes. We know that the brain and the gut are connected through both nerves, the vagus nerve being the largest. The vagus nerve is actually 2 nerves, and chemical signals. Most of those chemical signals are hormones, because that is the fastest way the body can signal. So for example, norepinephrine, if you're, I don't know, if you're driving and something happens, you know, they tell stories about somebody actually being able to lift a car off of a child. If you're walking down the street and you see a car on a person and you're able to lift, that's because the norepinephrine is signaling. But what happens is the gut shunts the blood. So when you're stressed and the norepinephrine goes up, you're shunting the blood from the gut to the brain and then to the muscles. So it's like panic, and then it goes both directions. So that's the most important thing on this slide, is that it goes both directions. The brain can tell the gut to speed up, and the gut can tell the brain to speed up or slow down. I don't think that this is new news to anybody. I think everybody here probably knew that their digestive system was affected by their nervous system. Okay, this slide is a little bit more complex, and it's just kind of talking about how in the brain, if you look over here on the left, when there's stress, you release specific hormones. So the CRH and the ACTH and the cortisol are the hormones that are released. The cortisol actually comes from the adrenal gland, but up here, this is the pituitary, and the pituitary gland is in the brain, and it signals using this hormone to the adrenal gland to create cortisol. And then what happens is cortisol can cause leaky gut or dysbiosis. But cortisol is necessary for life. So we need some cortisol, but we want a high amount of cortisol, decent amount of cortisol in the morning, so that we wake up and we get on with our day and we are motivated. And then we want that cortisol to very slowly lower till the afternoon when we have energy, but we're getting a little bit more ready to wind down until bedtime when our cortisol goes to almost zero. And then that's when we start to make melatonin. So all of this signaling is happening, and the cortisol does affect the good bacteria in the gut. And so if you look in the middle of this slide, this is talking more about how prebiotics down here, drugs like pharmaceuticals, or illicit drugs and lifestyle habits all affect the gut microbiota and the gut. And interestingly, our stress and our state of mind can also affect whether we're using pharmaceuticals or what we're doing with our lifestyle. So again, there's the nervous system or the neuronal message. There's the endocrine message, which is the hormones like cortisol. And then there's the immune system message. And what happens when cortisol is high, especially for prolonged periods, like 10 years of time, the immune system is no longer going to deal with chronic viruses or chronic bacteria that have been there a long time. The immune system is only able to handle acute issues, and sometimes not even that. So I have patients that tell me they felt like they were getting sick again for the first time in 10 years, but it was just like a common head cold. But that's a good thing, because it means that your immune system is now addressing the viruses that you're being exposed to. So that's not a bad thing. If you're working with integrative medicine or functional medicine and you suddenly get a cold for 5-6 days, that's a good thing, because it means your immune system is producing a fever, is producing mucus to clear an acute virus. And all of that only happens, you only get sick acutely if you, oh great, you did captions. Is only happening if you have a balance of your hormones. So you have enough of the cortisol, but not too much. And also that's only happening if your nervous system is in a place where you can choose, you can kind of turn on and off the increase in the nervous system or the fight or flight and the rest and digest. And we only really want to be in that activated on sympathetic nervous system. We only want to be in the activated nervous system for about 20% of the time, and then in the opposite, in the rest and digest, for about 80% of our waking hours. So if you have a boss or a life situation that is making that impossible, start to think about how you can get out of it, right? Okay. So the other thing here is neurodivergence. So I just want to pause for a minute and tell you how I define neurodivergence. So when I meet patients, especially children, and they've been diagnosed with something like ADHD or autism spectrum, it makes me automatically think, what is going on in their gut? And the reason I think this way is because the research shows us that if you have ADHD or you have autism, you are much more likely to have dysbiosis. Now, if we can correct the dysbiosis or the imbalances in the gut, we know we can heal the brain. I've seen it over and over again. And I've seen children, at age 6 that then I saw again at age 17, 18, and I couldn't believe that it was the same person, because they were able to effortlessly enter social situations and leave social situations without a ton of stress on the system. They were able to excel in school, but, more importantly, with their physical and emotional health, they were just much happier. Right. So I want to point out that being neurodivergent is not a bad thing, but it is often a sign that there is something going on underneath the surface with the gut. A lot of time parents feel terrible if they have a child that's having difficulty at school or functioning in society, because they feel like it's their fault if genetically they might be neurodivergent. But what we see in real life is that neurodivergence is not mostly genetic. It's actually mostly the gut and how healthy is the gut. And that has been shown over and over and over and over again with 40,000 research papers on the microbiome. And we know that people with autism are missing specific strains of good bacteria. We know with people with bipolar are much more likely to have zonulin levels very high. Same thing with schizophrenia. They're much more likely to have a really malabsorbed gut so that they're not absorbing the good nutrients from their food. So it's a little bit like the chicken and the egg, in that we don't know for sure that the gut caused the neurodivergence, but we certainly know that healing the gut is important because it'll prevent a long list of other things. So I hope that makes sense. There's no connotation here of this being negative. It's more just if you've gotten a diagnosis of something that's more neurodivergent, which I think, people that are different are what make the world go round. There's nothing wrong with this, and you're more likely to have dysbiosis. I think dyslexia is an interesting one because some patients with dyslexia slip through the cracks. My sister has dyslexia and she was undiagnosed until college. And this is harder for teachers to see than something like autism or bipolar, right? Because it's sometimes just a little bit harder to diagnose. But dyslexia, you're much more likely to have dysbiosis and also just food allergies, actually. So, which food allergies, as we know from part 2, affect the gut. I can circle back to this if anybody has questions. The other thing is OCD. I'm going to talk about a couple treatments for OCD at the end, but we know that glycine and NAC are really good for sticky thoughts, and glycine and NAC greatly heal the gut and the liver. That's glycine, GLYCINE. So we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, we also know that we want to sit to eat. I think I talked about this in part 1, but we always want to sit because of where the vagus nerve is. And so when you're standing, what happens is the colon is actually kind of tucked and the vagus nerve is not elongated. It sounds counterintuitive. When you sit, just like when you squat on the squatty potty, the colon straightens out and then the vagus nerve is actually able to feed the colon and feed the vagus nerve can now innervate, or these tiny little branches of that come off the vagus nerve can now directly touch and help send blood flow and hormones to the small and large intestine. Does that make sense? So when you're squatting or sitting, you're in a much better position for the vagus nerve to work correctly. And that's what allows you to digest much better. The problem, though, is if you're sitting and you're driving, that affects the vestibular system of the brain and where the inner ear, essentially. So if you've ever had balance issues or dizziness, you know that the vestibular system is really important. Histamines are little tiny molecules that are actually produced in the gut, and there's an enzyme that's supposed to break down histamines called DAO enzyme. Well, when you're driving while eating, your body produces more histamines and you're not able to break them down very quickly. So something to think about is that you can feel a little bit nauseous and you won't digest as well if you're driving while eating. Your body needs to feel safe and stable in order to digest. And when I say body, I mean body, mind, soul, everything, right? So your mind-body connection needs to feel stable in order to digest your food. And I'm sure that we can all think of examples of when we're upset about something or when something, and you just weren't hungry because you're upset about something. Well, this is why your body's trying to protect you and saying, please don't eat if you're stressed or upset, because we can't digest right now. And then this is just another kind of reminder that your stress and your lifestyle and habits definitely can cause leaky gut. A lot of us are in the habit of drinking a large amount of caffeine, or not sleeping enough. We might get 7 hours, but we certainly never get 8 or 9, and we don't get enough deep sleep. That can cause leaky gut. Again, the over-exercise is big in a lot of my patients. They're confused. They come in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're confused why they can't go to CrossFit anymore. They're like, I used to be able to do it. But that's because the CrossFit has caused leaky gut because it's an intense amount of exercise, usually for at least an hour and a half sometimes. And then their hormones are depleted from the chronic leaky gut. Now, I'm not saying that CrossFit is bad. I'm just saying at the specific moment when I meet the patient, they're coming to me because their hormones are depleted. They wouldn't be coming to me otherwise, right? So I do have an interesting cross section of the population. So I want to make sure that it's clear that I'm not labeling things. Similarly with like really strong, powerful Ashtanga yoga or Pilates class, it can do the same thing. You're exercising and your body creates leaky gut so that you can absorb extra water. And then the side effect of that is that a lot of your hormones are depleted, like your estrogen and progesterone, especially progesterone, becomes depleted. So there's lots of little tricks and tips that I can tell you. Women often can work out really hard and intense like that, maybe twice a week. They don't usually do as well working out really intense for more than an hour, more than twice a week if they're still cycling. They also do better during the follicular phase with really intense workouts. So there's a lot of tricks that we can kind of tweak things. But in general, if you're over exercising, it definitely causes leaky gut. And then medications, I'm going to circle back to the medications in a minute because we think of pharmaceuticals as bad, but they're not all bad. In fact, there are definitely pharmaceuticals that can heal leaky gut. And then, of course, if you do have leaky gut, you're more likely to be diagnosed with one of these psychiatric or mental issues. And then you're more likely to also need a pharmaceutical. And again, often, but not always, the pharmaceutical causes more leaky gut. So it's like a snowball effect. I already mentioned gluten causes leaky gut. Gluten can also cause ataxia. And ataxia is when you're really unstable and your balance isn't great. I see that almost every day in the clinic. And I find it fascinating that in the conventional medical world, we haven't yet, we call it gluten ataxia, but it's very underdiagnosed. So I would hope that in the future, people are able to go to their typical primary care doctor and say, my balance is off. And the primary care doctor say, have you tried taking gluten out of your diet? Because that can cause balance issues. And then mineral deficiencies, especially something like zinc. Zinc is huge because if zinc is low, your testosterone will often be low. And if zinc is low, you will have what's called cryptopyrroles, and you will be not processing histamines correctly, and you will feel anxious. So zinc being low can cause anxiety. Zinc also heals the lining of the gut. So you see how it's all connected, and the things that help the brain, like zinc, help the gut. And then, of course, toxins. So this is a tricky one. Somebody asked me this week, could you just test me for that pesticide that you know is on corn? Well, unfortunately, the testing for pesticides is not great. We have so many different pesticides that we can test for. It's really expensive to test for all of them. It's like $1,200. We know that when you take out a food, though, if you feel much better, it can often be the pesticide and not the food itself. And corn is a great example. If you take out corn and you take it out for 6 months and you feel great, and you add it back in, try organic corn on the cob, because that should be pesticide free, and see how you feel. Because a lot of times people feel much, much better without the pesticide. And I'm talking about brain side effects like rage, impatience with everybody around them. That can definitely be a sign of pesticide exposure. And BPA, same thing, but BPB in the plastic that's hard is just as bad for us. It depletes our hormones and it causes leaky gut. So I hate to say it, but it's not just BPA, it's also plastics, period. So I'm going to switch gears for a minute and just talk about choline, because phosphatidylcholine has long been a treatment for liver disease, or it helps if you've been exposed to mold. It actually helps heal the liver. But interestingly, I went to a lecture last summer with Dr. Ben Lynch, the author of Dirty Genes, and it was like, I got to sit next to him at the dinner. I might have already told you all this. And it was like my 10-year-old sitting next to Taylor Swift, because I love Ben Lynch, but I was so scared I was going to say the wrong thing. So I tried to talk to him, and I don't know what came out, but Josh tried to help me. But we were talking about choline a lot because choline is what the brain is made of. So phosphatidylcholine actually makes up 30% of the gray matter in the brain. Choline is a fatty acid. It's a phospholipid. So it's got a lipophilic or a fat loving side, and it's got a water loving side. And the great thing about this is it can keep nutrients in the brain that the brain really needs to recycle, and it can also help with funneling nutrients out. So it creates sort of a membrane or a barrier. And if you think about the brain tissue, if you've ever seen a picture of like a cadaver brain, it's kind of smushy, but it's also very dense, right? It's very heavy. And this is because the phosphatidylcholine is heavy. It's a thick, fatty, but also protein-rich structure. And so when you're having brain issues, brain fog, long COVID, vaccine injury, hormone issues like low estrogen that are causing brain fog or fuzzy brain, or you're having trouble remembering things, phosphatidylcholine, taking it as a supplement, can make a big difference. And eggs are the only food that contain choline. So if you're not reacting to eggs, and you can eat eggs, great, because they're super helpful at healing the brain. A lot of children with ADHD have very low choline levels. And so we need to get the choline back in. Sometimes that's because they've had a toxic exposure and the toxin is using up the choline really fast. So we need to get the choline back in them really quickly. And because it's a part fat, we also need the digestion. The bile has to come from the gallbladder. The liver makes the bile, and the gallbladder stores it. And then we need the bile to break down the phosphatidylcholine. So we need to digest it, and we need it to go to the brain to repair and heal the brain. It's very possible to repair and heal the brain. I've seen it constantly. A lot of people are under the impression that some version of dementia is normal aging. It is not normal to age with dementia. It is prevalent, but that doesn't mean it's normal. So this is my kind of quick list of everything else that helps heal the brain. We know that collagen helps heal the brain, but there is a little asterisk there now with collagen. We don't want to overdo the collagen. And if you know you have a clotting disorder, if you're somebody that either got a COVID shot and had a clot, or got COVID and had a clot, and you were tested for clotting disorder, you should not be taking collagen, because collagen actually makes the platelets more sticky. So keep in mind that this is why you want to talk to somebody about your supplements and not just grab random things, right? Glutamine heals the lining of the gut, and healing the lining of the gut often leads to less brain fog. So glutamine can be helpful when there's brain fog. It's also really great for babies because it's super safe. So you can give it to anybody, any age, for when they're having constipation. It's great to heal the gut. Colostrum is also great. Most colostrum is sourced from grass-fed cows, but obviously human colostrum is the healthiest for us. Colostrum is the first few days of life what the mother makes in order to feed the baby. And so it's like a very thick, fat-laden substance. It's much fattier than human milk, and it contains a ton of immune globulins and antibodies that help lay the groundwork for a healthy immune system. So, again, we talked a little bit about C-section last time, but if you're a C-section baby and you were not breastfed, then you missed the colostrum. You can actually take, though, grass-fed beef colostrum in capsule form in order to get some to just heal the lining of the gut. This colostrum is also helpful if people have, like, we do allergy testing and they have such a long list of allergies, it's going to take a long time to heal from all those allergies. Omega-3s we know are really important for brain healing and for healing the gut. We want the omega-3s to always be tested for heavy metals, third-party tested. Choline I already talked about. So vitamin D we talk a lot about in the clinic because it's really important for sleep, quality of sleep. It's more of a hormone than it is a vitamin. It helps with your mood. It also helps heal the gut because it increases T regulatory cells. But don't forget that vitamin A and K and E are also important. They're the other fat-soluble vitamins, and all of them help heal the gut and heal the brain. Again, though, you need to digest them and absorb them in order for them to work. So if you take vitamin D, but you don't digest the capsule and it just comes out in your poop, then there's no point in taking it, right? You can also make vitamin D from the sun. Vitamin A and E, these are like your carrots, your sweet potatoes, your orange foods. And then vitamin K is in leafy greens. So sometimes it's also, instead of supplementing, if you don't know what your level is, take the vitamins through foods. It's always helpful because you're chewing and you're breaking it down a little bit differently than if you take a supplement. Leafy greens can definitely help with brain fog. And Kelly and I were talking about why we think maybe some of it's like sulforaphane, which is gut healing. but also brain healing. Leafy greens also contain B vitamins, which help a lot with brain health. People that have depression are much more likely to have low levels of B vitamins. I think I already talked about some of this. Detox work. So I also have patients that will tell me they take an Epsom salt bath and then they're able to digest their food better because it calms them down, but they're also able to have their brain work better. Okay, I think I talked about a lot of these. The NAC really helps more with the liver, which I'm going to talk about in a couple slides. ADHD. So when somebody comes in to see me and they say they were diagnosed with ADHD, I often look at number one, what's causing the inflammation? What allergies do you have that are undiagnosed? And what toxins are you being exposed to or were you previously exposed to? Number one is mold toxins. Number two is usually plastics and pesticides. And number three is heavy metals. So we can do testing for all of that, which is great. ADHD is often also very common when your testosterone is low. And then insomnia in the gut. So tryptophan is certain foods, right? Turkey, almonds have a lot of tryptophan, and this actually helps you sleep much better. So you take the food in through the gut, but it actually helps heal the brain. This is where I just wanted to talk for a minute about how SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which means they stop the reabsorption of serotonin. The problem is that serotonin is made in the gut and serotonin is depleted or depression is caused from low levels of serotonin in the gut, which happens during leaky gut. So if we can heal the leaky gut first, we can get to the root cause of the depression. But sometimes we also need a temporary treatment for depression while we get to the cause. We used to think that things like Lexapro were I just wanted to say Paxil, and there's another one that I just lost. But all of the antidepressants that are SSRIs, we used to think they were bad for the gut, but now recent research is showing they actually help heal leaky gut because they're bumping up the levels of serotonin temporarily by not reabsorbing. The tricky part is when you need to come off of the SSRI or the Lexapro. It's tricky to come off without lowering serotonin. So we have to increase things like SAMe and GABA, which actually increase serotonin. So, but again, this is all happening at the level of the gut. It's just that your brain is noticing, hey, the serotonin is really low. I'm going to be sad today. But if we can address the gut healing, it's a much better long-term solution. Having said that, a lot of times we need to temporarily use something like, or fluvoxamine is an old SSRI, but I use that for long COVID when people are having depression and it works really well to increase serotonin. So it's not the worst case scenario. I think that we often label pharmaceuticals as bad, but we should be thinking of what is the right tool for me at this time and try not to pass judgment, right? Because there's always going to be, people have a preconceived notion, even about herbs or supplements. Oh, I don't want to take those, right? So we sometimes just need to stay open to what's the thing that's going to work for me right now and use your intuition. So the thing I wanted to point out here was when I put into Google, hey, does serotonin actually cause leaky gut, or does Lexapro or fluvoxamine, does that help heal the gut? And there's a 2005 study. There's also Amy Myers has a great website, and she talks about how leaky gut, candida, overgrowth, and SIBO also lower your serotonin. But we've got a lot of research here, and it should be a little bit more mainstream that we're talking about all of this. But I think it's getting there. Okay. We talked a little bit about this, but just not in these fancy terms. GALT is the lymph system or the immune system that surrounds the intestine. And it's very interesting because you have the same kind of lymph system surrounding the brain. So when you move the lymph system, you often help heal the gut and you also help heal the brain. So you move the lymph system by walking. You move the lymph system by dry skin brushing, trampoline, vibration plate. But if you lie in bed all day and you don't feel good, you're likely to feel worse because you're not moving the lymph system at all. I'm not going to talk too much more about that. And then this is just a little bit of intro into liver healing. So we are going to do a happy food reset, and I'll show you the date is coming. And I will invite you all to join us because we're going to talk a lot more about why the liver is so important. But we know that when you take food in, coming from the stomach and the duodenum, the liver is actually circulating blood around the intestine and the stomach, and it's picking up nutrients from the intestine and the stomach, but it's also picking up toxins. And so what happens is if you eat McDonald's or fast food, you end up, the liver has an overburden of toxins. And what happens then is that the gut has to work much harder, and the liver's overburdened and becomes a little bit sluggish, and then the digestion slows down. So you can have some constipation or a sluggish digestion because your liver is overburdened. And just by nature of living in the real world, a lot of us have livers that are at their max. And the problem is there's no great blood test for this because your liver enzymes will look completely normal even when your liver is just being overburdened by day-to-day life, by stress, by toxins, pesticides, plastics, all the things I already talked about. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 10-day reset together where we focus on eating and drinking foods that heal the liver. And at the end of the 10 days, you can go another few days if you feel really good, but you can tell us how your symptoms have improved. So I invite you to join us because the community is really great. We're going to do that in April. So see, these are some of the signs that your liver is actually causing an issue. You're having mood swings. You could have some jaundice of the eyes, but that's usually later. Hormone imbalances, fuzzy thinking, mysterious rashes can be a sign of liver issues, headaches, swelling in the stomach or legs, muscle aches. Okay, so we're going to talk about all of this again. And this is actually kind of where we focus when we do the happy food reset. So I just wanted to show you guys, because Kelly put this in here saying it's coming. We're going to do this in April. We're going to do the happy food reset because here's your liver and here's all the nutrients your liver needs. Your liver needs all the B vitamins. It needs all of the proteins and all of the healthy fats in order to function correctly. So it's starting April 19th. We're going to do the intro, and then we're going to say, here's the groceries you need. Here's what you need over the weekend. And then we'll start on the 22nd for 10 days. And this is based on Deanna Minnick, who was my professor at the University of Western States, but she's an IFM professor. She's a PhD in nutrition. She's done this reset with over 10,000 people. And it's hugely successful. She does it mostly online where people join and you just do 10 days together. It sounds so simple and it is really easy to do, but we're focusing on eating the rainbow and we're focusing on all the foods that help support detox and heal the liver. So let us know if you want to join us. It's going to be really fun. You don't have to be present. We're going to have a couple calls during the actual food reset, but the most important is this first Zoom call with Kelly on April 19th, where we will be there at noon. Okay, the last thing I want to go over, and then we're done, is type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes causing issues with Alzheimer's and dementia. So I don't know if you know this, but if your blood sugar is extremes, if your blood sugar is either very high or very low, it definitely can increase your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. So sometimes people have a really good A1C, but I would encourage you to get a continuous glucose monitor like we have in the office. You wear it for 10 days, and then it helps us see how much are you going up and down. Because if your blood sugar is 180 and then 60 and then 180 and then 60, that's not great for your brain. So what happens is your brain tries to adjust, but it really can't. And the blood sugar level is about 40 points higher than the sugar in your brain. So for example, if your blood sugar fell to 40, the sugar in your brain would be at 0, and that's when you're at risk for seizure, right? But if you had, let's just say your blood sugar was 100, then the sugar in your brain is 60, which is where it wants to be. That's actually where your brain wants the sugar to be. So we have an epidemic in this country of type 2 diabetes, but we also have a lot more type 1 diabetics than we used to. We are all, we have to be careful because even if you have type 1 diabetes, you have to make sure you don't get type 2. Type 2 is insulin resistance. But we know that if you have an average blood sugar of 190, then you have a 40% higher risk of dementia. if you are a middle-aged type 1 diabetic, they didn't specify in that study how controlled they were, but I suspect not perfectly controlled, then you have higher rates of brain lesions and slower cognitive function than people without type 1. So anyway, blood sugar is really, really important for brain health, and your gut also regulates how much sugar you take in. So for example, if you have candida in the gut, your blood sugar is going to yo-yo up and down to the extremes a lot faster than if you don't have candida in the gut. I already talked through all of these. This is just a reminder, and I think I'm going to leave us on that slide. Okay, Kelly's going to answer more questions and do this to keep the discussion going on March 22nd, which is next Friday. But I'm going to leave it on this while we go through the chat and answer some questions. If you want, you can unmute yourself. And then I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you so much for joining us. How do I stop it without stopping my screen share?